We spend our entire lives trying to find ourselves. We read self-help books, go to therapy, take personality tests, explore different careers, travel to distant places, all in search of our true self. We're constantly asking questions like, who am I really? And what's my purpose? And how can I become more authentic? We treat the self like some precious treasure that we've misplaced and must recover at all costs. But what if this entire quest is based on a fundamental misunderstanding? What if the very thing we're trying so desperately to find is actually the thing that's preventing us from living fully? What if the self we're trying to discover is actually a prison we've built for ourselves? What if the answer isn't to find yourself, but to lose yourself completely? This is one of Alan Watts's most radical and liberating insights. He understood that what we call the self is not some fixed, permanent, essential thing that we need to discover and protect. It's a story we tell ourselves, a mental construct we've created, a collection of thoughts, memories, beliefs, and identities that we've mistaken for reality. And this mistaken identity is the source of most of our suffering. Think about it. When you say, I am anxious, what is this I that's experiencing anxiety? When you say, I am successful, or I am a failure, what is this I that's being judged? When you say, I need to find myself, what is this I that's doing the searching? And what is this self that's being sought? The more closely you examine this sense of I, the more elusive it becomes. Watts called this the illusion of the skin-encapsulated ego. We think we're separate, isolated individuals trapped inside our bodies, looking out at a world that's foreign and potentially threatening. We believe we're independent agents who must compete, achieve, accumulate, and defend ourselves in order to survive and thrive. We see ourselves as tiny, fragile islands of consciousness in an ocean of otherness. But what if this entire perspective is wrong? What if you're not a separate thing at all, but a process, a pattern, a temporary configuration of the same energy that makes up everything else? What if you're not an isolated individual, but a unique expression of the whole universe? What if you're not something that has consciousness, but consciousness itself, temporarily identifying with a particular body and mind? When you begin to see through the illusion of the separate self, something extraordinary happens. The chronic anxiety that comes from constantly trying to protect and improve this fictional character begins to dissolve. The exhausting effort of always trying to be someone, become someone, prove yourself to someone, starts to relax. The prison of self-consciousness that keeps you trapped in your own head begins to open. This is what Watts meant by the wisdom of losing yourself. It's not about becoming nothing or disappearing into some void. It's about recognizing that what you really are is so much more vast, more connected, more alive than the small story you've been telling yourself about who you are. It's about expanding beyond the narrow confines of your personal identity and remembering your true nature as consciousness itself. But here's the paradox. The more you try to lose yourself, the more self-conscious you become. The very effort to transcend the ego actually reinforces it. It's like trying not to think of a white elephant. The attempt creates exactly what it's trying to avoid. This is because any trying, any effort, any striving automatically implies a someone who's doing the trying, and that someone is exactly the illusion you're trying to see through. So how do you lose yourself without trying to lose yourself? How do you transcend the ego without creating a spiritual ego that's trying to transcend? How do you step outside of self-consciousness without becoming self-conscious about stepping outside of self-consciousness? The answer, according to Watts, is not through effort, but through understanding. Not through doing, but through seeing. Not through becoming someone who's lost their self, but through recognizing that there was never anyone there to lose in the first place. It's like waking up from a dream. You don't have to work to make the dream disappear. You just have to see that it was always just a dream. This seeing can happen in many different ways. Sometimes it happens during meditation, when the constant chatter of thoughts temporarily subsides, and you realize that what you really are is the awareness in which thoughts appear and disappear. Sometimes it happens in nature, when you're so absorbed in the beauty of a sunset, or the sound of waves that the boundary between observer and observed seems to vanish. Sometimes it happens during intense physical activity, when you're so completely absorbed in what you're doing that there's no mental space left for self-consciousness. Athletes call this being in the zone. Musicians call it becoming one with the music. Artists call it losing yourself in the creative process. But what's really happening is that the illusion of being a separate someone doing something to something else temporarily dissolves. Sometimes it happens in moments of great love, when you're so completely present with another person that you forget yourself entirely. Sometimes it happens in moments of great beauty, when you're so moved by something that you transcend the ordinary boundaries of your individual identity. Sometimes it happens in moments of great danger, when the survival instinct is so strong that there's no room for the luxury of self-consciousness. What all of these experiences have in common is the temporary dissolution of what's called the observer-observed duality. Instead of feeling like a separate subject looking at separate objects, you experience a kind of seamless participation in what's happening. Instead of feeling like someone who's having an experience, you realize that you are the experience. Instead of feeling like a person in the world, you recognize that you are the world expressing itself as a person. This is what mystics throughout history have been pointing to when they talk about enlightenment, liberation, awakening, union with God, or cosmic consciousness. They're not describing some special altered state that only a few people can achieve. They're describing the natural state that's always available once you see through the illusion of being a separate someone. But here's what's really beautiful about this understanding. You don't have to wait for some dramatic, mystical experience to taste the freedom of losing yourself. It's available right now, in the most ordinary moments of your life. Anytime you're completely absorbed in what you're doing, anytime you're fully present without self-consciousness, anytime you're experiencing life directly rather than thinking about life, you're getting a glimpse of what it means to lose yourself. Watch a child playing. They're completely absorbed in their game, completely present in their activity, completely free from self-consciousness. They're not thinking about who they are or how they're doing or what others think of them. They're simply playing. This is the natural state of losing yourself, not some exotic spiritual achievement, but the most ordinary and natural way of being. Or watch someone deeply absorbed in their work, completely focused on what they're doing, forgetting themselves in the task at hand. Watch lovers lost in each other's eyes, forgetting that there are two separate people there. Watch anyone completely engaged in anything they love, and you'll see what it looks like to lose yourself naturally and effortlessly. The problem is that most of us have been conditioned out of this natural state. We've been taught to be constantly self-aware, constantly evaluating ourselves, constantly thinking about how we're doing and how we compare to others. We've learned to live in our heads rather than in our bodies, in our thoughts rather than in our direct experience, in our stories about life rather than in life itself. We've been taught that self-consciousness is sophistication, that analyzing ourselves is wisdom, that constantly working on ourselves is growth. But what if the opposite is true? What if self-consciousness is actually a form of suffering? What if constantly analyzing yourself actually takes you further away from yourself? What if working on yourself all the time actually prevents you from simply being yourself? This doesn't mean that reflection, learning, and growth aren't valuable. It means that there's a difference between occasional self-reflection and chronic self-consciousness. There's a difference between learning about yourself and being imprisoned by your self-concept. There's a difference between healthy introspection and obsessive self-analysis. When self-awareness becomes chronic, when you're constantly watching yourself, constantly evaluating yourself, constantly trying to improve yourself, you create what's called the double bind of self-consciousness. You become someone who's always trying to get outside of themselves to look at themselves, which is impossible and exhausting. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, or trying to bite your own teeth, or trying to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. The very effort creates the problem it's trying to solve. The harder you try to understand yourself, the more confused you become. The more you try to control yourself, the more out of control you feel. The more you try to improve yourself, the more inadequate you feel. This is why Watts suggested that the path to freedom is not more self-consciousness, but less. Not more analysis, but more direct experience. Not more thinking about life, but more living life. Not more trying to find yourself, but more forgetting yourself in the joy of simply being alive. But how do you do this in a culture that's obsessed with self-improvement, personal development, and finding your authentic self? How do you lose yourself in a world that's constantly telling you to find yourself? How do you become unself-conscious in a society that values self-awareness above almost everything else? The first step is to recognize that losing yourself doesn't mean becoming irresponsible, unconscious, or checked out. It doesn't mean stopping all self-reflection or abandoning all personal growth. It means finding a healthy balance between awareness and absorption, between reflection and direct experience, between thinking about life and living life. It means learning to be fully present in whatever you're doing, whether that's washing dishes, having a conversation, walking in nature, or working on a project. It means discovering how to give your complete attention to what's happening right now, without the constant mental commentary about how you're doing or what it all means. It means practicing what Watts called purposeless activity, doing things simply for the joy of doing them, not because they're going to get you somewhere or make you someone. Playing music not to become a musician, but for the pure pleasure of making sound. Gardening not to have a perfect garden, but for the satisfaction of working with the earth. Dancing not to look good, but for the freedom of moving your body. It means learning to trust your natural spontaneity, instead of always trying to control and direct your behavior. It means allowing yourself to respond naturally to situations instead of constantly calculating the best response. It means being willing to not know who you are, instead of always trying to figure yourself out. This can be scary at first, because we've been taught that our self-concept is our security, our identity is our safety. Our story about who we are is our protection against chaos and meaninglessness. But what Watts discovered is that the opposite is true. The more tightly you hold onto your self-concept, the more anxious and restricted you become. The more you defend your identity, the more you limit your possibilities. The more you insist on being someone in particular, the less alive and spontaneous you become. When you're willing to lose yourself, to not know who you are, to be nobody in particular, you actually become more alive, more creative, more responsive to life. You discover that you don't need a fixed identity to function effectively. You don't need a solid self-concept to be a good person. You don't need to know who you are to love and be loved. In fact, the most attractive people are often those who've forgotten themselves. They're not trying to be anyone in particular. They're simply being natural, spontaneous, present. They're not working to maintain some image. They're responding authentically to what's happening. They're not defending some identity. They're open to whatever wants to emerge. This is what Watts called the art of not being anyone. It's not about becoming nothing, but about being so flexible, so responsive, so present that you can be anything the moment calls for. It's about being like water, which takes the shape of whatever container it's in while never losing its essential nature. When you live this way, you discover that you're actually much more than any particular identity you could claim. You're not just a teacher or a parent or an artist or whatever role you play. You're the consciousness in which all roles appear. You're not just your thoughts or your emotions or your personality. You're the awareness in which all these phenomena arise and pass away. This awareness is what you really are, and it can never be lost because it's not a thing that can be misplaced. It's not something you have. It's what you are. It's not something you need to find. It's what's doing the looking. It's not something you can lose. It's what remains when everything else falls away. When you recognize this, the whole project of finding yourself is revealed to be unnecessary. You can't find what you never lost. You can't become what you already are. You can't achieve what you never stopped being. The search for yourself is like a wave searching for water or a cloud searching for sky. You are what you're looking for. This recognition is incredibly liberating. You can stop the exhausting effort of constantly trying to understand yourself, improve yourself, find yourself, be yourself. You can relax into what you already are. You can trust your natural spontaneity. You can be present without self-consciousness. You can live without constantly thinking about living. But perhaps most importantly, when you lose yourself, you discover that you're not really separate from anything else. The boundaries between self and other, inside and outside, me and not me, are revealed to be conceptual constructs rather than actual realities. You begin to experience what Watts called the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence. You realize that you're not an isolated individual in a foreign universe, but a unique expression of the universe itself. You're not separate from nature, you are nature. You're not separate from other people, you are other people, experiencing themselves from a different perspective. You're not separate from life, you are life, living itself as you. This understanding transforms everything. Instead of feeling like you need to protect yourself from the world, you feel at home in the world. Instead of feeling like you need to compete with others, you feel connected to others. Instead of feeling like you need to achieve something to be worthwhile, you feel inherently valuable as part of the whole. Compassion becomes natural because you see that there's no real separation between yourself and others. Love becomes effortless because you recognize that everything is part of the same fundamental reality. Joy becomes your natural state because you're no longer carrying the burden of being someone in particular. This is the ultimate wisdom of losing yourself, according to Alan Watts. It's not about becoming nothing or disappearing into some void. It's about recognizing what you really are, not a separate, isolated, limited individual, but unlimited consciousness itself, temporarily identifying with a particular body and mind, playing at being a person for the sheer joy of the game. When you see this, you can play your role fully without being trapped by it. You can be someone without believing you are someone. You can have an identity without being imprisoned by it. You can participate completely in the human drama while remembering that it's all just a magnificent performance. You become like an actor who's so skilled that they can become completely absorbed in their role while never forgetting that they're acting. They can feel all the emotions, speak all the lines, perform all the actions, while maintaining a deeper knowing that transcends the character they're playing. This is the freedom that comes from losing yourself. Not the freedom from life, but the freedom to live completely. Not the freedom from being human, but the freedom to be fully human, without taking your humanity so seriously that it becomes a prison. Not the freedom from playing roles, but the freedom to play any role joyfully because you know that no role defines what you really are. You are the consciousness in which all experiences appear. You are the awareness in which all thoughts and feelings arise and pass away. You are the space in which all stories unfold. You are what remains when everything else changes. You are what you've always been, what you'll always be, what you could never not be. And the beautiful thing is that losing yourself to find this truth doesn't require years of meditation or spiritual practice. It's available right now in this moment, as soon as you stop trying to be someone and simply allow yourself to be. As soon as you stop thinking about life and start living it. As soon as you forget yourself completely in the joy of simply being alive. This is the wisdom of losing yourself. Not a teaching to understand, but a truth to embody. Not a goal to achieve, but a reality to recognize. Not something to become, but something to remember. You are already what you're seeking. You have always been what you're looking for. The only thing you need to lose is the illusion that you were ever lost in the first place.